Build on a segment we did a couple of days ago about sovereign immunity. Welcome to the program. We have Arkansas attorney. We have Mr. Luther Sutter is on the line. Did I pronounce your last name correctly, Luther?
You sure did, and I certainly appreciate it. A lot of people pronounce it Sutter, but
I was pronouncing it Sutter the entire program until just now. So you have to forgive me.
Well, that's all right. I thank you for having me on. It's I don't really do many radio or TV stuff, but I think it's time for me to start talking about this on the radio. I like to settle issues in the courtroom, not on the radio or in the street.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Looks like the Arkansas Supreme Court has left us only one option these days.
Right. And so let's just talk about that. For our listeners who maybe don't know, well, last week the Arkansas Supreme Court handed down a ruling essentially saying that the Constitution says that the state of Arkansas shall never, be a defendant in any of her courts. Now, on a couple of levels, Luther, I enjoy a court interpreting the plain meaning of the text. And I've talked to attorneys who, when they were in law school before 96 or whenever they changed it, that was how they were taught, that there was this sovereign immunity aspect of it. And then, of course, it's changed, and we, as citizens, had recourse against our government, and now we don't. And so there's no question that, under the old interpretation, we as Arkansans had more rights than we do today. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a move afoot. There's a move afoot in our state today to create another class of citizens, I think. The ruling last week essentially says that the king shall do no wrong. And we all know that that's wrong. I spent the last 22 plus years holding government accountable when, government messes up. And the ruling last week actually takes the power away from the people. Mm-hmm. And there's a move afoot to do precisely that, especially, not to digress, but the two kind of go hand in hand. The tort reform, the so-called tort reform amendment that's on the ballot this November. Mm-hmm. Both this ruling and that amendment will effectively create a class of citizens whose life is valued at $250,000, who are unable to sue in state court if state government comes in and seizes your property or your guns or anything else. Mm. Essentially,
wow.
if the Supreme Court adheres to the ruling they issued last Thursday, we will not have a conduit to review agency action against us.
Yeah, and that's a huge problem. I mean, because you already had a case that was dismissed, thrown out because after the ruling. I think it was somebody suing the Oil and Gas Commission, and it's like, well, you can't sue us now. I mean, we're sovereign entity, we can do no wrong, and it's a big problem. I think in the short term, the solution is, well, okay, we've got to make government as small and limited as possible. Then, I mean, if we have no recourse against the king, then we need to make sure our elected officials actually shrink the power of the government and what they can do to us by force. But in the long term, we need to find some way. I understand. Are there people thinking about petitions and trying to amend the Constitution now?
Yes, we are trying to do that, but it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to get an amendment on the ballot. And remember, the Attorney General, whose job it is to defend statutes, she has made it clear that, statutes giving agency workers the ability to blow the whistle. She has made it clear that she was not going to defend those statutes, in my mind. Mm. Now, what she is supposed to be defending the people. And I have yet to see her in court one single day. And so you are correct. We've got to shrink government. We've got to find some way to get people in government that will protect protect our rights, because I'm telling you, sir, this ruling last Thursday is a game changer. If a state agency comes in and seizes your child, you may not have any recourse for review of that.
Yeah, due process. You have no due process.
You have none. And so
is somebody texted earlier? They texted the show and they said, "Okay, what about suing the state of Arkansas in federal court over this entire issue?" I mean, is that possible?
Well, we're looking at that, but as you know, the states are supposed to be sovereign.
Yes.
They're supposed to be at least co-equal to each other, and the federal government is supposed to respect states' rights through comedy. Well, as we all know, both the far right and the far left have been assaulting states' rights on various fronts, given whatever policy they wanted to achieve but couldn't achieve through the legislative process. So there's something called the 11th Amendment, and while we can sue in federal court, our remedies are very limited because of the 11th Amendment.
Yeah.
And so in this particular environment, and I know what I'm going to say next is going to upset some people, but it's just the truth. The Trump administration has been appointing judges in the lower courts that have started lessening our Fourth Amendment right.
You say Fourth Amendment?
It's Fourth Amendment. I mean,
okay.
So the Fourth Amendment is clear. It says, we are free from unreasonable search and seizure. Yet, over in the Sixth Circuit, one of our president's nominees, John Bush, has launched an assault on the Fourth Amendment, saying that, or leading the law enforcement to believe that perhaps something less is required than reasonable suspicion to obtain a warrant.
Really? That's not good. That's not good at all.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
So, all right, well, folks, we're talking with the attorney. We're talking with Luther Sutter, and obviously you can tell he's very passionate about this. So, I mean, we've got some avenues. I am of the opinion that the Arkansas General Assembly, they could refer a ballot amendment, a ballot initiative out next session to try to correct this. I don't think they will, because I think there may be somebody that tries to do it, but I think they're going to be very happy. The government people are going to be very happy that they can't be challenged, and it'll be very hard to get something like this changed now. But let's talk specifically about freedom of information. The Freedom of Information Act in Arkansas is one of the best in the entire country. It's one way to hold government officials accountable. But now we're now to the point, though, if they don't comply, if a government agency doesn't comply with freedom of information, we can't sue them, right? We cannot actually make them take the state to court and make them give us the information. Is that correct?
Well, yes. I mean, if they read it literally, state agencies can now say, "Oops, sovereign immunity." But again, we're going to continue to fight this and try to create a cause of action. It's actually called the ex parte Young fiction in federal court, and it's a fiction because I think it doesn't make sense. Anytime you call something a fiction, it says it's because it doesn't make sense. But as it stands now, I will not be surprised if Arkansas Supreme Court says that you can't enforce the FOIA in state court. And, guys, a right that you can't enforce is not a right.
Mm-hmm.
It's a privilege.
Yeah.
At most it's a privilege, and I have rights, not privilege.
It's a shame because I mean, I've been watching what's going on at the Marble Palace for a while, and I'm of the opinion that we have it's I mean, we got some crooks down there. Quite honestly, we have some dishonest people down there, and we need as citizens, who are actually in the real world, creating the wealth and the money that the government takes from us. We have to have some recourse to hold these people accountable. And right now, you're saying, Luther, that recourse was completely destroyed last week.
Yes, sir, I am, and again, there's some arguments that I'm going to make to hopefully lessen the impact of that ruling. But as it stands now, the two Supreme Court justices, Joe Hart and Karen Baker, got it right.
Well, so let's talk about the actual ruling, okay? Because, you have the Chief Justice, Dan Kemp. He says, he's citing a passage in the Constitution that says the state of Arkansas shall never, okay? And to me, the word never is pretty conclusive. But my question to you is, in the 90s, when they changed it, we used to have this sovereign immunity concept, and in the 90s, the court reversed the precedent. How? What was their argument to reverse a word like never?
Well, you've got to read all the phrases in the Constitution. You can't just pick one out. And the precise wording says shall never be made. And to me, a reasonable interpretation would be shall never be made means involuntarily. And the legislature is the state, and I thought under Article 2, as well as considering, the provisions that say for every remedy there's a wrong, that's a constitutional provision. But clearly, if you interpret the Constitution the way the Supreme Court did last Thursday, then clearly there's not a remedy for every wrong, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. There isn't a remedy for every wrong. Yeah, if you can't take the state to court.
And so they interpreted the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's interpreted the constitutional provision in such a way that, in my mind, it renders another constitutional provision meaningless. And you just don't do that. You try to harmonize both of them. And so, I don't know if your listeners know this, but the first original intent decision was Dred Scott. And nobody argues Dred Scott was a good decision. This decision by the Supreme Court is our own Dred Scott.
Really? That's a pretty bold statement.
Well, sir, I've argued for the U.S. Supreme Court. I filed nearly 5,000 cases, and this has been my life.
Wow.
And basically, the plain reading says shall never be made a defendant. But are you making somebody a defendant involuntarily when the legislature says, hey, we're going to allow our citizens to bring certain issues into court because sometimes politicians may be corrupt. Look at the Arkansas Whistleblower Protection Act that's now probably gone. If you are a state agency worker working right now and you see waste in government and you want to report it, essentially you have no protection under the Arkansas Whistleblower Protection Act. And I ask, what better policy could we have than to provide our state workers who seek graft protection from retaliation?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, I've had so you're saying the whistleblower law is pretty much null and void because I've had state workers, call this program that maybe they want to sound off on something, but they, and they're a state employee but they want to keep their names, anonymous. They don't want to actually tell who they are because they are afraid of reprisals, and so you're saying now, if they really wanted to get serious and try to hold somebody accountable, that the whistleblower laws are going to be basically meaningless now because of this ruling.
Right, and I've got one case against the treasurer, Dennis Milligan, and the allegation was that he was using state resources to basically campaign.
And so I guess that's thrown out now too.
That's going to be the next case that decides it. State versus Milligan, and so if we can't hold our politicians accountable in court, we're going to have to hold them accountable at the ballot box.
Well, you're exactly right. Attorney Luther Sutter, I'd love to do this again because I think we need to keep bringing attention to this issue, and I'd love for you to keep me informed about any movements or anything we can do to try to, give folks the option of suing the state of Arkansas. I think that needs to be our right, and right now it's not. So I appreciate it, sir. Thank you so much for coming on the program.
Thank you.
All righty. Have a great weekend, folks. It's Johnny Cash Friday. Back in a moment.